I'm Trevor Babb with the Contemporary Guitar blog, and my special guest today is Dusan Bogdanovic, joining me from Geneva, Switzerland. Dusan is a composer, guitarist, and author of several books about theory and applying it to the guitar, and we're here today to talk about his newest book in that realm of writing, Harmony for Classical Guitar. Dusan, thanks so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. It's good to be here, Trevor.
Yeah. Well, Dusan, let's talk a little bit about how the book came about. What was your desire to write this thing? In the preface, you mentioned that there are some holes that you felt needed to be filled with the existing repertoire or the existing literature, really, that's out here in this kind of style. What were you hoping to do with this book?
Well, you know, I did another book on counterpoint in 3 voices for guitar, and that included also improvisation in the Renaissance 16th century style. And when I was writing that book, that was kind of more geared towards very specific sort of subjects, like such as, you know, improvising Renaissance and focusing on primarily on the Renaissance counterpoint. So it was all kind of essentially the Palestrina style. However, I mean, I taught harmony for many, many years, and in particular at San Francisco Conservatory, I taught in conjunction with the harmony, I taught analysis of guitar literature. When I was working with David Tannenbaum, he was very keen on, you know, on working with that, and I thought that was a great, great class to do with students. And so actually, most of the material that I have here about the harmony comes from that period. So it's been like probably 15 years ago or so that I started compiling all this material. So this book originally wasn't necessarily just going to be like a theory book. It wasn't going to be just a theory book, but at the same time, it gives an analysis of representative pieces from primarily, I would say, from classical romantic period, and then some of the contemporary, but more contemporary that are kind of less contemporary than the more contemporary that are really more contemporary. So for example, I'm mentioning the Bagatelles by Walton or Piazzolla, some of my pieces. So I would just say that, so that's pretty much the orientation. That's the orientation of the book. Then the other part of it is the theoretical part of the harmony. And just like I did with counterpoint here, I sort of had several different sources for this harmony. And some of the sources were actually harmony that I studied long time ago in Yugoslavia when I was a student. So there was some of that harmony, some of the basics. Then I used quite a lot of Hindemith's harmony. Hindemith's harmony is really very, it's very interesting. It's really excellent, excellent textbook. And then I also plunged into Schoenberg's, the analysis of structural harmony. And I'm just looking here what exactly, structural functions of harmony, that's right. So these were the books that I used. Also, some of the examples come from Walter Piston's Harmony, which is also kind of like a really great book. And then some of the works that I did actually when I was a student in Switzerland. And some of this is André Marchal, Notion élémentaire d'harmonie. So these are some of the great fretboard exercises. So actually, it's sort of like the whole book is conceived as talking about particular subject and then having a series of exercises, and you know they're all, you know, obviously fretboard harmony primarily with figured bass. Sometimes there are also melodic lines that you're supposed to harmonize. So it's a combination of the two. At the same time, I think that work that I did at the San Francisco Conservatory came in handy, so that actually there is a fair amount of analysis of the works and how the harmony is being incorporated, how, let's say, Mertz uses the alterations harmonic alterations in his works. How did Regondi use the same? How did Tarrega exploit the same idea? So there's a lot of comparison, and there's fair amount of actually a fair amount of wealth of literature. And it just took forever to get all the permissions. That's kind of, so whenever I write books these days, all I care about is just to see the copyrights, what to do with copyrights if I can get all the permissions. So anyway, it took like 1 year for Curci to get the copyrights all together, partially because of the COVID also, partially because of that. But now just kind of looking at my musical examples, as I mentioned in the introduction, there are also some of my personal biases, that is to say, just the things that I really like. So there is like huge amount of examples from Bach, preludes and chorales, etc. Napoleon Poste, there are quite a few examples. Some of the Debussy, it's not guitar literature, but I thought, what the hell? I mean, I just love this stuff, like the Des Pas sur la Neige, the preludes, etc. More things I might mention, Antonio José, the sonata. So there are some of the newer things also that have not been really analyzed all that much. At least I haven't seen analysis of these pieces. Then some of the traditional Ponce, many analysis of Regondi. And that's also because I'm a real fan of Regondi. I think his sense of harmony is extremely sophisticated and refined, and perhaps could be compared to Chopin. So if they said Fernando Sor was the Beethoven of the guitar, then we can say that Regondi was the Chopin of the guitar. Fernando Sor, of course, and as I mentioned, some of the newer things, Walton, Piazzolla, Tanzmann, Turina. So there's a lot of kind of very traditional repertoire, but I would say that the prism through which it is seen is kind of pretty special in that way. And so it reflects on this work that I did, especially in San Francisco. Also, I did here and there during these years, especially in the United States, when I was living there, I did a fair amount of classes on fretboard harmony, and I worked with the students on that. So it all kind of comes in somehow together. Now I'll mention something because I think this is an interesting question. I was looking somewhere on the Facebook, and then there was some information about this harmony. And then there was some guy, I don't remember, I mean, it doesn't matter really what his name is, but there was this Italian guy, and he was kind of complaining. He said, why write harmony for classical guitar? Why should there be like a, harmony for piano and then harmony for harpsichord? Meaning there's only one subject, which is harmony. True. It's not completely off the mark. However, the only serious work on harmony can be done really with piano and guitar. I mean, sure, maybe you could write a harmony for violin, but I don't think you would have all that much to say about that. So I think that the guitar, the use of harmony on the guitar is just so overwhelming that I think there's really a need for harmony and for classical guitar in particular. So This book, as I mentioned in the introduction, I think that the methodology, I think, is very logical, and I think it's applicable also to jazz.
In conservatory training, we are all doing these harmony classes, learning counterpoint as well, which you addressed many years ago. And we spend all our time applying it at the piano, at least in my experience. All of that coursework, application was at the piano. And I kind of had to I remember saying can I do this on guitar? Because my instrument can do this. And I think too that pianists and guitarists apply harmony on their instrument differently, because there are different affordances that each instrument gives to the musician and to the composer who's writing for the instrument to actually put the general nuts and bolts of harmony and action in
Right.
real music on that instrument. And I remember hearing Steve Goss make a comment about how even though he's a guitarist, he conceptualizes harmony mostly at the piano as a composer. And so the way that the two instruments apply this subject of harmony is very, very different. So I think it's great that we have this text now that is actually applying the subject matter to our instrument, because I think it's something that doesn't really get addressed very much in modern conservatory training. And so how do you envision guitarists engaging with the material here in order to really master the material that's here, and not just have it be okay, like, yeah, like here's what a triad is, and here's this list of pieces that use triads. What's the next step for the guitarist to really master the material that you've presented here?
Right. Well, as I mentioned before, there are several aspects of this work. So one aspect is the fretboard harmony, but it's not necessarily the only one. And this book is not, how shall I say, it's not like a specialized book for fretboard harmony. And I mean, I don't know how many specialized texts there are for classical guitar, but jazz is like completely swamped with there are like millions of books on fretboard harmony, etc. So actually, I was reluctant in the beginning to even do this book, thinking there's just like too much literature on all this. But to come back to your question, I think that it's sort of like a combination of working and analyzing pieces that the guitarists already know, and at the same time looking at these pieces in the context of harmony theory and in the context of all the exercises that exist here, so that they can just take like many of these examples and they can apply it. For example, there are like I think there are like maybe 2 or 3 pages of just sequences. So I think that's extremely useful, and you can just sort of use that kind of stuff and also apply it when you're playing traditional repertoire. So that, for example, I'm just mentioning sequences because, that's something that's extremely practical. With sequences, I start with Da Milano. That, again, is my personal preference just because I like Da Milano so much. Anyway, examples of Da Milano sequences, Bach sequences. I take like, various, I mean, not to kind of like ponder on this too long, but, some of the kind of like really sort of famous examples of sequences. For example, there's a sequence from the first lute suite in E minor towards the end of the first movement. Then the Fugue 1000, there is, for example, a sequence towards the end. And I give example of both the lute sequence and the organ sequence, because there is a version of this fugue also written for organ. That's like, so the violin lute is 1000, and then the organ one is 539. Then I take like some source studies, I take Targa preludes. So to go a little bit further, then we come to Regondi, Antonio Jose, Walton, etc. So these examples, these are all different types of sequences that can be actually put into practice. So I give these sequences, and then I'm just suggesting that this might be something to be worked on. And also to kind of, this has always been very big for me, treating the literature of classical guitar as a living entity. And that's kind of like a big problem in general in classical music. I mean, I'm making a big generalization. However, the fact of kind of not including much improvisation, relying always on the written word, not being able to kind of extrapolate anything, that has been a big problem. And I'm also hoping that this will, in a way, kind of make this material really alive. I mean, I've done that when I was a student, just because I guess I'm that kind of person. I've always been interested in improvisation and in composing. So I would sometimes take the sequences from the pieces that I was playing, and I would just take them elsewhere, So, or I would play a fugue by Bach, and then I would improvise a prelude to the fugue by Bach and things like that. So I think that's also something that I'm counting with, so to say, is to make the material of the repertoire that otherwise sort of stays like carved in stone, you could say, to make it really something alive and something even formally flexible, etc. Just so you understand really the connection between the theory and the practice. And there are many of these exercises, as I said, there are many exercises in here that can be applied. I translated a lot of these exercises from piano. I applied it to guitar, but then some are less specifically meant for the guitar.
Right.
So I know when you mentioned that Stephen Goss is saying how he thinks of harmony with the piano in reference to piano. I have to admit that I also think very much in reference to piano. It's just because it's such an easy instrument. It's just like everything is in front of your eyes. All the keys are there. And also the registry.
Linear, there's one key for each pitch.
Right.
Guitar is a completely different nut to crack.
Exactly. So maybe that's something else that I should mention also. You actually make this point very well. It's actually that the guitar is such an idiosyncratic instrument. It is so difficult to really think on the guitar.
Yeah.
It's easy to think on piano, but it's very hard to think on the guitar. And so I hope this will also kind of, contribute, to sort of these things that I was talking about.
I think this idea of learning the sequences and learning the general musical elements and rudiments on the guitar is so important for students who want to go into the world and make a living playing the guitar, because it's one thing to go and be a concert guitarist, but it's another thing to be at a wedding gig or a funeral gig, and you have to just kind of fill space. And maybe the groom gets cold feet and you're still playing the prelude and you're getting to the end of your Bach and you have to do more. And so or maybe you have to time something in a more utilitarian context so that you can finish music when this particular moment is complete. And that is a skill that we learn by studying harmony and learning how our instrument works and being able to freely fill space. So let's talk a little bit about, the way that you learned harmony and the way that you learned the fretboard and how that influenced your approach to writing this book.
Okay. Well, the other thing I wanted to mention is that actually improvising fretboard harmony, this has been something that musicians have done for many centuries. It's not like it just came up, these days, and probably those musicians in the Renaissance days, in the Baroque, they were probably also doing some wedding gigs or whatever they were doing. But I'm saying, it is a practice, that has been there for centuries. If you just think about how much Bach had to improvise for his congregation at the church, etc. It was very integrated. So anyway, now to come back to your question. Well, it sort of comes back to how I started playing guitar. My father, who wasn't a professional musician, he was just doing something else. He was teaching physics. He was actually like a physics teacher, but he played violin and guitar and mandolin. And so we always used to play all these instruments. When I was a kid, we used to play two guitars. Sometimes he would play violin. Sometimes we would play mandolins together. We played Leopold Mozart duets for violin and things like that. So I grew up in that environment where I sort of didn't discriminate, so to say, too much between one kind of music and another kind of music. So when the Beatles came in, I started playing the Beatles. So all this stuff, as I was growing up, I started playing when I was 12, until time when I left for Geneva to study here, which was when I was 18, 19, 19. So all that time was spent in absorbing huge amounts of different kinds of music. And so a lot of, jazz pieces, like I said, the Beatles tunes, R&B, together with Boccherini and, whatever else I was doing. I started doing like Bach preludes and things like that. So it all kind of was one sort of one thing. I didn't necessarily distinguish between these styles or these worlds, if you want, aesthetic worlds, different aesthetic worlds. So anyway, once I came to Geneva, I focused much more, and so I studied guitar and composition, but I still kept on working on my fretboard harmony, and I still had the same sort of view, actually. I mean, I viewed actually the literature that I was playing kind of relatively traditional repertoire. I would play, say, some Dowland, Fantasia, and then do like, I used to play a lot like the second Lute Suite by Bach in D minor, however, not in A minor, in D minor, which was extremely difficult to play. But anyway, that's a digression. So yeah, things like that, Villa-Lobos studies. I did some Mendelssohn songs without words, transcriptions myself. Some of my music I always used to play, and I don't know, Giuliani, Ohana, I used to play Ohana, and fair amount of contemporary music as well. So anyway, even with all this repertoire, I still stayed with this sort of vision of what I was doing as a part of this practical sort of view of harmony. And I continued still always working in fretboard harmony. And then once I went to United States, after I left Geneva, I did a huge amount of playing jazz. And I actually stopped playing classical music for a few years, maybe even 3-4 years, I would say. And I had some great people to play with over there. When I was in LA, I played with Milcho Leviev, a great Bulgarian pianist, composer, Charlie Hayden, the bassist, and James Newton, like a great flutist, one of the greatest jazz flutists. And I did my recordings. I did some of these initial recordings also with the same people. And then I worked with Miroslav Tadic, a great guitarist, and we did like a lot of work together. So anyway, at that point, so that was like, say, from I left in 80s, maybe just the beginning 80s. Then throughout that whole period, for maybe almost like 10 years, I did a lot of improvising and playing, mostly playing my music, really. I mean, I wasn't playing necessarily, jazz standards. I mean, I love jazz standards, but I played my own music. That was my focus. But it included a lot of improvisation and sort of necessarily fretboard harmony. So anyway, so that kind of approach stayed with me, and it's still there, so. Being, I don't even know if I would call myself necessarily a jazz musician. I was an improviser, kind of like a creative improviser, if you will. I think that kind of attitude stayed with me all along. And so when I came back, well, actually, first to mention, in San Francisco, I did various classes that were including fretboard harmony. I did one class 1 year of the counterpoint in 3 voices. Then I did another class in, for example, just arranging, and I included like arranging for voice and guitar, chamber music, different things. And so, I mean, it was always working in some ways in my teaching and in my life. And then when I came back here to Geneva, I did a few years of improvisation classes, which I sort of abandoned eventually, just because I felt it wasn't really that interesting for me, just because, there'd be people that just want to learn basic stuff, and I just wanted to do something kind of a bit more interesting. So ultimately, I came up with this composer-performer program, which I established in Geneva, and which kind of had a life of, I don't know, 6 years maybe. And then now, since I left last year, I think he just died. I'm kind of sorry to say, but somebody has to pull these things. There has to be somebody with a passion, with interest to pull this. I don't think there was anybody really that interested in pulling it. But anyway, my idea for that class was to precisely to put all these things together and to kind of make some kind of really eclectic eclectic practice. And I don't know if you were there when we did that the Multimod festival.
No, I missed that.
You missed that. Okay. Well, that was a really interesting thing too. That was multiple modernities for composers' performance. I know it's kind of.
I remember seeing information about that, and it looks so cool. Well, since we've been talking about improvisation, let's talk about, it is a book called Harmony for Harmony for Classical Guitars.
Yes.
But how would non-classical players benefit from using this book, if at all? Most of the harmony that's being presented is presented from kind of this classical context, and all the examples for the most part are all notated classical music. How does somebody who's approaching this book from a different musical idiom benefit from this book being in the world?
Well, I did have that question myself, and I was originally thinking maybe calling it Harmony for Guitar. I just wasn't sure really what to call it. I mean, there are some other harmonies. I remember that John Duart has a harmony. I don't know if it's for classical guitar as well. You know what? I think that as everybody knows, playing jazz, I mean, you have to really become a master precisely in playing chords at any position possible, and that's part of the mastery of jazz. So the fretboard harmony is really a given. However, often, I think often people don't have very clear voice leading. And often they don't necessarily treat, I mean, I'm not talking about Joe Pass. I'm just talking about, kind of more sort of middle of the road players. But, often the voice leading and the counterpoint is not that clear. I mean, you have people sometimes strumming, I mean, what does that mean? Again, I'm kind of generalizing a little bit, but I would say, in my opinion, that would be probably, that would be the best use for an improviser, for a jazz musician or some other improviser. Also, the fact that there are these exercises, the exercises are there, and also maybe to enrich a little bit the repertoire, just as classical guitarists or classical musicians in general are not, quote unquote, supposed to be so versatile. These days, probably much more than before. I think the jazz musicians are not, all that kind of knowledgeable often of our literature, of the classical guitar literature. So to look at the harmony in the context of a somewhat different language, I think it's also very enriching, actually. I actually started, because I was also teaching the 20th century, I started compiling also material for the 20th century harmony for classical guitar, but it's just so much work to do that. To come back, just to add something to the jazz aspect of it, actually the main reason, I'm really sorry to say this, but the main reason I don't have more jazz examples is because they're so expensive. It's like you have to get forever, because this is mostly contemporary music. This is all published by somebody. And it's like these people want you to, to contribute to their retirement fund or whatever. So I think that was one of the reasons. So some of the jazz pieces that I have is of my friend Milcho Leviev, because I knew he wouldn't run after me if I published his examples. But it's been different. For example, this other book that I did, Ex Ovo, I have more jazz examples. And the publisher had to pay for every one of these examples. Luckily enough, Curci actually have absorbed, I don't know if that's the right word, the Babb editions. And so actually all the examples that are there from the Babb editions, they were kind of already permitted. They had the permission. However, they had to go to Universal Edition for Walton and various other things. And so it was kind of like, took 1 year. It took 1 year just to get the permissions. So in order that I can still kind of not be completely, in a wheelchair or dead, I wanted to kind of, I wanted to see something, alive in the reality. So that's one of the reasons why I don't have so many jazz examples. And I know it seems very trivial, it seems very kind of pathetic, but it's really hard when you do these books. You need a lot of these permissions, and it's humongous amount of work actually to do all that. So anyway, I'm just saying this is kind of anecdotal, but it's actually true.
Well, what about composers? What can composers benefit from this book? We have some great material out there for composers who want to know the various things that the guitar can do. I'm thinking particularly of Seth Josel's book that came out a while ago. But I think that harmony applied to the guitar is something that's very perplexing to composers who don't play the instrument. So what do composers benefit from having this book available to them now?
Well, I think, that they can just see how the music is constructed on the guitar. They can see the fretboard. They can, just like composers study Haydn and they study, the classical literature mostly on the keyboard. I mean, here they have similarly a very, very rich literature, and they can actually see how it's all applied on the guitar. Sure, this is primarily, as I said, classical and romantic literature with a little bit of contemporary. So unfortunately, it doesn't cover a lot of contemporary techniques and, many other things that, so I think, we'll just have to wait and see. I was jokingly, I wrote in this email when this harmony came up, I said I wrote this harmony after 13 years looking for the publishers. And perhaps my 20th century harmony if I live to be 105. So anyway, I'm just kind of making a joke out of it, but it's really, it's not easy. I think that there are some people that have done really good work. John Schneider, for example, who is very much involved in microtonal guitar, he's done some excellent work for contemporary guitar. So there are some books. I would say this nevertheless would be very, very helpful for composers that want to learn about like historical aspects of using harmony and fretboard harmony on the guitar.
Yeah, and I think too that there's ways to take these basic ideas of traditional tonal harmony and understanding how that works on the instrument that you're writing for, even if you're not wanting to write like Burgundy. You get a sense for the historical precedents that are out there, and then as a composer you can incorporate those ideas into your own musical idiom. And so I think this is really, really excellent. So talk a little bit about what else you're working on now that the book is published and available. What are you working on now with just kind of what can we expect to see from you down the road a little bit?
Well, actually now that I have retired last year, I mean, I have a lot more time to dedicate to composing. So I've been working more on composition and recording things. I just recorded in a studio here at HM, at the school where you went, the Haute École de Musique in Geneva. just recorded my Hong Kong Richter cars for guitar and piano, for example. That was Natalia Plisetskaya, I don't know if you know, and Yurika Takayama, she's a Japanese pianist. So anyway, we just recorded this stuff, and I also have all of my preludes. I have these seasonal preludes like the springtime, etc. And these preludes are going to be recorded by Angelo Marchese. I don't know if you ever heard an Italian, excellent, really Italian guitarist. He's recording all of my preludes for the Brilliant Classics, which is really an excellent record label. So I've been doing a lot of stuff like that. I mean, I've been working on different things, and there's also another piece for guitar and piano that's being recorded by a Polish duo, and they just recorded that as well. Apart from that, I actually wrote this book called Ex Ovo some time ago. Now I made kind of a PowerPoint presentation, which now I'm transforming into a video. And this one is called Ab Ovo, not to make it exactly the same, Ex Ovo. This one is Ab Ovo, which really means the same, out of an egg. And anyway, this one is kind of much more concerned with the transformation of motifs in different sort of processes of transformation. And it's more just to do with composing and improvisation. So this will include like very different sort of a multitude of different examples, including Ligeti and Nancaro and some other Jeff Holmes, for example, a composer. So there's all kinds of examples in there, and it's sort of like a taxonomy, really. It's kind of like categorizing different processes of motivic transformation. So anyway, I've been working on that, and I don't know what to do with it yet. But it's kind of at this point, it's a video of a PowerPoint presentation. So I'm not sure what exactly to do with it. I mean, I don't think that I want to make it into a book. Actually, I would like to stay in the domain of this kind of like a different kind of media. So there are lots of images. There are also examples. Of course, in PowerPoint presentation, you can just turn on the examples. So anyway, I'm still kind of toying with this, and I don't know exactly how to maybe make it into a DVD or something like that. So these are pretty much things that I'm doing these days. I'm not performing all that much, really.
Who is?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, exactly.
Right now,
I know. Yeah, I was supposed to go to a bunch of festivals, and finally I'm just going to this Antony festival near Paris because they commissioned me to write a piece for guitar. So they invited me, so I'll go there. But apart from that, I mean, right. It's really tough. I mean, for performance.
Yeah, well, things are hopefully turning around very, very soon.
Yes, they are.
And I think that we're hopefully getting to the end of this weird, wild year and change that we've been through.
Right.
Well, thanks so much, Dusan, for taking the time
Trevor.
and talking about your new book. The book is Harmony for Classical Guitar, and you can get that from Editioni Curci, right?
That's right.
And you can find it from various retailers out there. It's a great contribution to the pedagogical literature with guitar. Thanks again, Dusan.
Thanks a lot. Much appreciated.